Can you talk to us a little bit about, give us some detail about the brain and why kids become so attracted to screens?
Well, yes. So dopamine release, which is, again, that's the pleasure neurotransmitter. It's the neurotransmitter that drives us, to do things, to get gratification right away. So dopamine responds to one factor more than any other factor. And it's not, dopamine, by the way, is what we get from, anything that's instantly gratifying, be it, drugs and alcohol, be it gambling, so we get the same kind of dopamine hit from when we're doing anything that stimulates us right away, right? So the main factor that predicts how much dopamine we get is not how intense the stimulus is. It's not how much pleasure we're getting. It's not how, the type, it's not the form of pleasure that we're getting. It's actually how fast you get the pleasure, right? So it's that delay in gratification that predicts how much dopamine release we get. So a cigarette, for example, doesn't get you extremely high or intoxicated, but because it gets us the feeling it's supposed to give us as soon as we smoke it, it's extremely addictive because it produces a lot of dopamine just for that reason. So the main factor is time, right? And technology is such an instantly gratifying way for kids to be stimulated. It requires so little patience. It requires so little sustained mental effort. You just don't have to wait now. You can just pull out a device and you're already being entertained. And there's many other factors about video games and other types of social media and screen entertainment that draw our kids to it, such as the social factors, that kids are socializing on games, and especially at a time when they're so socially isolated. There's a concept called variable ratio reinforcement that's a little bit like playing the slot machines in Vegas. The game makers design video games and social media with a lot of layers of variable ratio reinforcement, a lot of this sort of like slot machine type of delivery of rewards where they're random and unpredictable. And that gets kids on for a long time too. So all of these factors get kids coming back to the screen again and again, and it gets them to stay on the screen for a really long time. Now, the problem is that, a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of pleasure, is a good thing, right? But if you have that continuously, maybe for hours or maybe for days, what happens is the brain becomes desensitized to dopamine, right? So the reward pathways kind of get overwhelmed, and the receptors for dopamine, they go down in number, which is a process called downregulation. And what that really means is that the brain doesn't feel dopamine as much as it did before. So it's like tolerance, like the way an alcoholic, going back to that analogy, needs more drinks to feel the same amount of pleasure than the amount of drinks they used to have when they started drinking. So it's the same thing with, excessive and continuous binging on digital technology. Eventually, you're staying on the screen, not because it feels so great, but because if you get off, it's going to feel terrible. You're going to become really uncomfortable if you stop, because once you're really desensitized to pleasure, what happens is there's a residual effect. So when you get off the screen and you go back into your regular environment, say a class, it's even harder to focus. Everything becomes even more boring, because now that you're less sensitive to pleasure, that doesn't just mean that screens will give you less pleasure. It means that everything is going to give you less pleasure.
Wait, hold the phone. Are you saying that homework is not, it's kind of boring? I feel like you're implying that. So a couple of things. First of all, it is so astounding, and you say it so well, how you're not just playing to win anymore. In other words, to get more pleasure, you're playing not to lose. You're playing not to be bored, not to be exposed to feelings of depression and pain and loneliness. A couple other things you made me think of. One is and I hadn't thought of it in quite these terms till you said it, but you were talking about gaming being social. So we know about role-playing games, we know about multiplayer games,
Yeah.
we know there's a social component to games where, and kids will tell their parents, I can't let down my teammates, I can't get off the game
Yep.
now, right? But there's for social, for the social addiction, Snapchat, Instagram, etc. Those are also games in a way.
That's
And I
right.
hadn't really thought about, but the games are social and the social are games, because those
Absolutely.
socials, it's all about likes and hits and, you
Mhm.
know, and, oh, you look so beautiful, you know,
Right.
and, you know, and everyone's doing that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I started watching this, what is now becoming a very popular thing on Netflix, The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
And just how deliberately algorithmic these things are to hook
Right.
us. Something I'd really recommend watching. And it
Mhm.
reminds me of the food addiction and how, you know, Pringles, et cetera, that they really deliberately research to get you on the sweet spot. So
That's right.
it'll make it completely addictive. Social dilemma for everybody.